Good Tuesday afternoon, everybody. Rob O'Connor here from RobVenoSports.com with our first early look of the 2017 college football season. We take an early look at Week 1, and to do that, I need to bring in the founder of RobVenoSports.com, none other than Rob Veno himself. Rob, how are you this afternoon?
Hey, I'm doing great, Rob. Busy summer, and now, of course, as we know, we'll head into a very, very busy September through next April with the conclusion of the NCAAF basketball tournament. So ready to go. A lot of work put in so far this season, and hopefully the listeners benefit from some of the stuff we have to give them today.
Well, we got a lot of games to get to. We got a little bit of a teaser last week with Week 0 or Week 1, whatever you want to call it. But there were a few games, a lot of points. And let's see what's going to happen with the rest of Week 1 that's going to be played starting Thursday night. And one of the marquee games that is on the card Thursday night, maybe not from a point spread standpoint, but from a national relevance standpoint, is Ohio State opens up on the road at Indiana. Last season, these two teams met. Indiana gave them a bit of a game on the road at Ohio State. They met in October last year. Ohio State got a 38-17 win, but definitely a very respectable showing from Indiana in that one. Any chance they can make it a close game or even pull a stunner to start the 2017 season?
Yeah, and well, the point spread here, Rob, indicates that Ohio State should be in pretty good shape. Open 21, total of 53, bet down now to 20.5, but the total's really been on the rise from 53 all the way up to 58 as we speak here on Tuesday afternoon for that Thursday night game. The interesting development, of course, over the offseason was the firing of Kevin Wilson, head coach of Indiana, and his immediate employment by Ohio State. Kevin Wilson, now the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, which has led Urban Meyer to proclaim that they are going to go fast, and faster with Kevin Wilson. Of course, we know him from all his his coaching stops, offensive coordinator stops, and then head coaching stop at Indiana, that he likes tempo and he likes offense, and he's installed that with Ohio State. Not that they were necessarily a slow team to begin with in Urban Meyer's power spread, but we can expect, with all the returning talent here, Ohio State to go even quicker. And I think, Rob, that's probably got a lot to do with the increase in the total here. Bettors understand that Kevin Wilson is a high-volume play guy, high-scoring coach. So with the offense in his hands here, that would make a little bit of sense. I think you could take the other side of the coin somewhat and understand that Kevin Wilson knows everything Indiana's running, especially defensively, with Tom Allen now promoted to head coach of Indiana. Of course, he came from South Florida last year to become the defensive coordinator of the Hoosiers and did wonders. Obviously, Indiana improved defensively by leaps and bounds, something they hadn't done in quite a few years. So Wilson's got good knowledge of the Indiana defense. Won't change. He doesn't have explicit knowledge of the offense at Indiana, but you know what, Rob? Not much is changing there. From spring practice through summer practice, the new offensive coordinator, Mike DeBoard, who was formerly the Tennessee offensive coordinator, hasn't really changed all that much in what Indiana has done. Richard Lago back at quarterback, a lot of pieces back there for IU. So I think advantage Wilson in this case, advantage Ohio State in this case. The bigger picture, I guess, outside just simple fundamentals in this ball game is it's a Big Ten game right off the bat. It's a divisional matchup right off the bat. And it's huge, huge, huge for Indiana, the home team here. So I think that, you have to take a look at least both sides of the coin here and give the home underdog a little bit of look in your handicap. They've got the defensive unit, and with Lago in his second year at quarterback, I know last year he wasn't as efficient as he probably could be, but maybe this year it gets a little bit better for them in the passing game. it'll be interesting for sure. That Ohio State secondary, quite a bit of it graduated to the NFL. So, like I say, a very, very important game, a very, very good matchup with a lot of headlines inside the game. I think the 20.5 probably is fairly priced, but I do think the people hit it right, the money hit it right by playing over 53. At 58, I don't know, we're starting to see some take back towards 57.5, but I think if you got in early, over the total was a pretty good bet at the 53 number.
Let's just talk about totals in general for a second. We saw a few games in week one, and we'll throw out the BYU-Portland State game, but we saw a lot of points in Hawaii and UMass. We saw a lot of points from Stanford and Rice. We saw a lot of points in Colorado State, Oregon State. Typically this time of year, you would think the defenses might be a little bit ahead of the offenses, but did not get that impression on Saturday of this past weekend. Do you think what we saw Saturday plays in anything to totals rising at all heading into this weekend?
You know, it's interesting, Rob, because I was as a guest on a radio show last week where I had actually said, you know, the rise in the South Florida, San Jose State total especially, that game went from, I think, 63 all the way to 71.5 at one point. It subsequently came back before kickoff and I think went off in the 69 area. But, you know, odds makers are no fools, and the increase in the number of teams in FBS football that play high-tempo offense now is unbelievable. And we've seen it explode over the last 5 years or so. We've seen odds makers have to adjust where totals are concerned, and I thought that they did adjust somewhat, and the people just carried the South Florida game too far to get that one over the 71.5. But, you know, I think that to answer your question directly, I think that odds makers are going to make you pay a little more for over the total now because of the fact that so many teams want to get off 80 to 90 plays per contest. You get so many more possessions. Hey, just think about this, Rob. South Florida punted 12 times in that game. Where did they find the time to punt 12 times and still score 49 points? It's crazy to think that you can get that many possessions in a game, but teams do now. And I think that's why these numbers just, as soon as they hit the market, I think people mechanically play them over, especially offenses that they know are high-powered. So we'll see. I checked back a little bit into last year, and by the end of last year, we had seen totals for games such as with Texas Tech involved that got as high as 81 and maybe even a little bit higher. So I think you will see an increase from the odds makers, and we'll see if the money doesn't push things a little too far this time around. It didn't necessarily in week one. I happened to cash with a overplay on UMass and Hawaii, and that one got there relatively easy. So I think you have to be situational, pick and choose your spots, but, you know, you're going to find that overs get drilled by the bettors right from the get-go on Sunday afternoon when the numbers come out.
Let's take care of a few housekeeping items here before we jump into the Saturday slate. The first one is University of Houston and UT San Antonio. That game has been postponed, still questionable as to whether or not it will be rescheduled. As you know, the city of Houston just been crazy flooded with all the rain from Harvey, so our thoughts are with those guys down there. Obviously, that football game not on the top of everyone's mind. The other one, a game we're going to get to right now, we'll talk about a little bit, is BYU and LSU. The game was scheduled for Houston. That will not happen. It will be moved to Louisiana, to New Orleans, to the Superdome. Not a true home game for LSU, but definitely perhaps the opportunity of getting a few more of their fans there and creating a little bit of a travel headache for BYU fans looking to get to the game. So in addition to breaking down the game, a couple questions on that one for you are, how does the change of venue impact things, if at all? And then second question is, BYU did play a Week 0 game against Portland State. It didn't look overly impressive, but they didn't need to look overly impressive to beat Portland State. Any advantage to them having 4 quarters of football under their belt already against opposition?
Yeah, usually there is, Rob. Usually there is an advantage to a team that's gotten some of the rust knocked off. I think in BYU's case, you have to come to a set conclusion in your own mind whether they were knocking off rust in an unimpressive 20-6 win over FCS Portland State, or if they were just going through a very vanilla game and not showing LSU anything. I think if you're BYU, you probably took the entire summer to game prep for LSU, not Portland State. So they've had a lot of time to get ready for LSU. They probably, the Portland State game week was probably used by the Cougars, again, with game planning and installation strictly for LSU and not for Portland State. So I think the 20-6 final can be taken with a grain of salt, and now we're going to see BYU break out the playbook and break out the defensive playbook against the LSU Tigers, who have named Andy Etling the starting quarterback. Yeah, I'm interested to see LSU now this season, Rob, to see, obviously with Dave Aranda, the hire at defensive coordinator last year, it really went as a seamless transition. LSU was as good defensively last year as they had been any year prior under Les Miles. The first-year defensive coordinator really did not make a difference, negative difference. I think they were probably better, probably a positive subsequence having Dave Aranda as your offensive coordinator. And the fact that they made a coaching change, the promotion from within, and kept Aranda as the DC, I think speaks volumes. Now we have Matt Canada coming over to coordinate the offense from Pittsburgh. And, it's hard to say what these guys are going to do when they get to their new jobs, but I'll say that if you had told me last year that the Pitt Panthers, with Nate Peterman at quarterback, were going to be as explosive point production-wise as they were, I would have probably taken any amount of money against that. It seemed like a team that was going to be run-oriented behind James Conner. You have a head coach who's very much his philosophy is defense and run the football. But that's not the way it worked out. Nate Peterman, even without a huge throwing arm, completed a ton of passes for Pitt, directed, as I mentioned, an explosive offense. And you could see the same thing happening here at LSU. Danny Etling is very comparable to Nate Peterman. Peterman now in the pros. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Matt Canada and his offensive system, which includes a lot of jet sweeps and different formations and a lot of play action. It's an interesting offense. It worked well at Pitt. Could work well here. We see an increase in this point spread. LSU opens 12.5, now up to 14.5. I see one offshore right now, actually a lone wolf throwing up a 16 at this point in time. The New Orleans venue probably better. More LSU fans can get there, although the difference between New Orleans and Houston not that much distance-wise. But I'm interested to see the LSU offense here. The total has risen from 44.5 to 47.5, 48. And I'd almost venture to say that that money is correct, and I think that LSU will make a firm point of putting extra points via the offense on the board this year. We'll see what Canada does, but I really think that they have a good shot of being a fairly explosive offense this year.
I look at it as you got LSU, and I think that the fact that they stuck with Ed Orgeron and he got the full-time gig, I think it just sets them up so well this season to hit the ground running. BYU is going to be a solid football team, not a great football team. I think they're really taking a bit of a step up in class. I don't necessarily like 16 so much, but I think anything 14 and under is probably a good bet that LSU can win by at least a couple of touchdowns and a couple extra points.
And let's note also, I mean, I don't think we're coming with any earth-shattering news here, but the difference between Leonard Fournette at running back and Darius Geis at running back is minimal at best. We've all seen what Darius Geis can do. It's going to be his show now out of the backfield, and if Matt Canada can establish any type of balance in that offense where the defense isn't allowed to stack 8 men in the box against the running game, the way they were allowed to do against Leonard Fournette, because nobody feared the pass from LSU. If Matt Canada can establish something to keep defenses honest, like I say, this could be a really good offense to go with. It really, the defense, maybe not last year's caliber, but certainly LSU always has athletes, and if Ed Orgeron's known for one thing, it's recruiting. So, I'm with you, Rob. I think LSU has an opportunity to be a very good football team this year. I think BYU's got returning players in good positions. Obviously, having Tanner Mangum at quarterback is a big deal. But the receiving core, from what we saw last week, and again, it could have been a vanilla game plan, but that receiving core didn't look too good to me, and I don't know that they're going to find a lot of separation against LSU defensive backs in this game.
Let's jump ahead to a matchup of two ranked teams on Saturday afternoon in Arlington, Texas, when you've got Michigan playing Florida. I guess the most interesting thing about Michigan so far has been their delay in releasing team rosters, and I mean it went so far as people filing Freedom of Information requests to see who's a scholarship football player. I mean, is this Harbaugh just playing mind games? Is there any advantage to it? I mean, Florida knows who they're going up against. Is this just a little game that Harbaugh likes to play here? And then what do you think is going to happen on the field? It looks like Michigan's about a 3.5-point favorite at the moment.
Yeah, and, as Jim Harbaugh said, I saw an interview earlier today, Rob. Jim Harbaugh said, hey, Florida's not telling me who their starting quarterback is either. Jim McElwain has gone as far as to say he might play three guys. Might play Felipe Franks, could play Luke Del Rio, could play Malik Zaire, the Notre Dame transfer. So they're very coy about their situation as well. Obviously, it works to their benefit because it forces Michigan to have to prepare for multiple styles of quarterback. So I don't know that Jim Harbaugh keeping secret who he's going to start as opposed to Jim McElwain keeping secret who he's going to start. I don't think there's much difference there. It could be easier for the Florida Gators to prepare because, let's face it, Michigan has drop-back quarterbacks. Whether it be Wilton Spate, whether it be John O'Korn, those guys are drop-back quarterbacks. I think the tougher practice and preparation assignment goes to Michigan because they do have to see or at least put in some defensive packages, schemes, alignments built for Malik Zaire, who can use his legs to make plays, and also for Felipe Franks and Luke Del Rio, who have, who are good passers. So that'll be interesting to see. Obviously, there's a lot of attrition on the Michigan side. It's been talked about all spring and all summer long, how many people they lost, how many players they lost to the NFL, and it's almost a rebuild type situation here. You only have 4 starters back on offense, 1 on defense. However, I use the word rebuild. I really shouldn't because at Ann Arbor it's more of a reload. Jim Harbaugh has so many talented young kids that he's brought in the last couple of years. Maybe they just step in and perform the way last year's team did. I think it would be hard to see their defensive unit play the way that defensive unit played last season. But still, the guys taking the place of the guys that left are very highly touted individuals, and all they lack really is full game experience. We'll see how that goes this week against a Florida team which has some suspensions to deal with first week of the season. Antonio Callaway, oh my goodness, how much trouble can one guy get into? An all-SEC caliber wide receiver gets out of trouble, and about 9 days later in July gets back into trouble. So, Florida, a team that's struggling to find offense, dealing with some issues of their own. It's a good football game Rob, but it's not as good a football game as we would like to see maybe in the middle of the season with Florida, running on all cylinders and with Michigan running on all cylinders. For that reason, it's real hard, at least for me, to project which one of these two teams is going to come out right away here, first weekend of September, and perform at top level. I just don't know. I think there's a lot of kinks to be worked out on both sides. And turnovers may play a huge role in this contest, maybe a special teams return or something as well. I think it'll be very competitive. Obviously, the line tells you that. It's priced that way. But I really have no true feel or good read on what either of these teams might do. I think they're both capable. Whether or not that shows up on Saturday is another question.
Well, that's one game on Saturday between two ranked teams, and normally opening weekend you get a number 11 versus a number 17, and it's all going. That's the game of the weekend, and everybody's looking at it. Not the case this weekend, as Florida State, number 3 in the country, plays number 1 Alabama in a game that will really set the tone for the 2017 season. Before we start breaking down the X's and O's and the 7-point spread, first question for you, which team do you think needs this win more to jumpstart their season?
Which needs it more? I would say that Florida State needs it more. Which team would get grilled the worst by the national media if they lost the game? That would be Alabama, obviously. So from that perspective, they don't want to hear that, so they need it as well. But I do think that Jimbo Fisher, that team came in last year, Rob, so highly thought of, inside everybody's top 5, if not the top 3, and then, got outclassed by Clemson one more time. Clemson wins that conference. Clemson goes on to win the national championship. So I think Jimbo Fisher's team has a lot to prove here. It's a very talented squad. Didn't exactly live up to expectations last year. I know they had some injury situations that caused trouble, but I think they need it more.
I think they need it more as well, but I think the reasoning might just be a little bit different in that I think over the course of the season, Alabama, if they were to lose, would have more opportunities to kind of reprove themselves against that tough SEC schedule that they play, where the ACC is loaded at the top, and Florida State will get a few other big games against Louisville and against Clemson, but you just don't know how those two teams will be doing as the season progresses. But in the SEC, you're going to get a couple of good games against some really good football teams. And even if those football teams have a loss or two when you play them, 1 or 2 losses in the SEC is looked upon much differently than 1 or 2 losses in the ACC. That's just the reality of it. Whether or not it should be that way is a whole another debate for another program. But in terms of just having the opportunities, I think Alabama would have an opportunity to really right the ship and have that loss be an afterthought, whereas everyone would keep going back to, well, Florida State lost to Alabama and they play in the ACC, and the ACC is not as good as the SEC. So I think they'd like to avoid that conversation for the next 2 months by coming out strong and beating Alabama and putting all that talk to rest.
Yeah, like I say, there's cases to be made on both ends here. Schedule-wise, if you're Florida State, I know Mark Richt's Miami of Florida team is highly thought of this season, probably as highly thought of as maybe a SEC West team like Texas A&M or, better than Arkansas. So for Florida State, besides Louisville and Clemson, they'll also have a shot to play the Florida Gators from the SEC East and that Miami of Florida team. So maybe they would have enough, Rob. Like you say, it depends how the season goes and how these teams, what their standing is, the opposition standing is, at the point in the season where Alabama and Florida State play each of them. For crossover games, Alabama, they usually get Tennessee, and they do again this year, but they also get Vanderbilt, which should be a win. So I don't know that the degree of difficulty at the Alabama schedule is much better than that of Florida State as we look at paper right now in late August, but that could all change. We know that can change in a real hurry as this season starts and then evolves. I know that Nick Saban off of the national championship loss and Alabama off of the national championship loss will be very hungry to prove something. And again, I guess, without really nitpicking, it would have to depend on what your definition of need is, whether it's internal need or whether it's need as far as the national audience is concerned. I think nationally Florida State needs it more. I think internally inside that locker room, maybe Alabama needs it more to get over that loss from Clemson last year. Remember, this is another ACC team here, and there's a lot of people at this point in time that will try to sell you on the ACC as being the better conference right now. Not so sure that's true, but there's a lot of chatter out there. So both teams would like to win for various reasons.
So then we got a few off-the-field issues with Alabama as well. First, Deshaun Hand arrested for a DUI. Nick Saban said the circumstances of that arrest don't warrant a suspension. Something tells me if they were opening up the season against Alabama A&M, he'd probably be suspended for a game. And then you've got Raekwon Davis, either got shot in the leg or shot himself in the leg, depending on whose version of a story you want to believe or what you've read. His status, any update on if he will play, he's expected to be a key piece of the Alabama defense this year that has lost quite a bit to the NFL.
Yeah, and Nick Saban obviously not jumping in and saying that he's going to be the ruler on that, whether the player goes or not, but his answer was it'll be a medical call. The doctors will make the call whether or not he's able to play. So I think he's disgusted, Nick Saban, with what happened, especially on game week. As head coach, I know he likes to have his players follow the strictest of rules, and to have them out at night probably doesn't sit well with Nick Saban. But, it's a loaded football team again. But I do think, Rob, as you mentioned, you start chipping away at defensive players on a defense where we see quite a few of last year's defense running around here in preseason with the ones in the NFL. Again, I know it's all 5 stars, but you still have to come out and play. And Alabama lost a ton of defensive talent. I just don't know that they're in any position to be losing players in a game against a team that's as capable as Florida State. So it could become an issue. I really think that on the defensive side, it could become an issue for Alabama, a team that a lot of SEC insiders believe will be carried by the offense early on in the season.
Well, Rob, everything tells me that these are 2 relatively even-matched teams, and right off the bat, my gut says take the 7 points. But I keep coming back to this one point that's really scaring me away from making this a big play, and that is give Nick Saban time to prepare, and he will find a way to beat you. If you look at his track record, when he's got months and months to prepare for a game, whether it's a month to prepare for a semifinal game or it's 6 months to prepare for a season opener, he's going to find every weakness and exploit them 9 times out of 10. So I guess the question to you is, any way that Florida State can overcome the amount of preparation and the amount of things that Nick Saban's going to, A, throw at them, and B, be prepared for, how are they going to overcome Nick Saban's master ability to game plan and find a way to win this football game?
Yeah, he certainly has that going his direction. I would probably say, from a negative what could be a negative. We don't know that it's going to be a negative, but maybe what could be a negative for Alabama, what could be a positive for Florida State, that, the subtraction of Lane Kiffin as offensive coordinator here and the insertion of Brian Daboll, it could be problematic in week one. Let's face it, Lane Kiffin called the game far differently than the way Brian Daboll is going to call it for Alabama now. And all reports out of Alabama throughout the spring, throughout the summer, that Daboll's been absolutely fantastic in his new role, and that the transition will be seamless. The players love it. It's going to go back somewhat, Rob, as we know, to an offense that Nick Saban would prefer. We saw a lot of sideline stuff last year between Saban and Kiffin, where Kiffin's just a more wide-open type coordinator, and that's not necessarily Saban's style. He realizes that in 2017, you have to open it up. You can't be prehistoric and just run the ball the way Alabama used to. This isn't Bear Bryant. This isn't Woody Hayes. This isn't Bo Schembechler. Those times are gone. You have to open it up a little. But I do think you'll see the running game come back, especially when you have Bo Scarborough at running back. Why not use them? But they have explosive guys on the outside, too, Calvin Ridley, Robert Foster. I think the offensive coordinator here could be a big factor for Alabama and the change in play calling. And I think on the other side, remember, you're working with a brand-new running back here. I know Cam Akers is the talk of the land as far as freshman running backs are concerned, but can you imagine coming out of high school and this is the first game you're going to play in your college career against this defense, against this team? Will Cam Akers come out of the chute and be as good as Dalvin Cook was last year? It's what you're going to need to beat Alabama. You're going to need that type of runner and that type of performance. So I think there's issues on both sides of the football here.
I mean, what do you see in terms of line movement trends? Anything there that stands out to you?
Well, I'm like you. I was a little bit surprised that the number was where it was, but again, I took a step back and I went to power ratings, and the power ratings do show that the number's fair. I think sometimes the eyes can trick you. That's why you go and use power ratings as a, at least a ground foundation of where to start, not necessarily of what to bet, but where to start your handicap. Even with everything considered, though, I'm still leaning a little bit toward the Florida State side here. Derwin James, the safety for Florida State, when he went down last year in week 3, Rob, I don't know that I was amongst, and I was probably in the majority of people last year that didn't really believe that his loss for the season, his injury, would cause such a commotion in Florida State's defensive play. I mean, once he went down, remember, USF put up 35 points in the first half, the very next game. And then North Carolina scored 37, and then Clemson scored 37 on them. And anybody who had an offense shredded the Florida State defense. James is back. I see him listed on the Heisman Trophy ballot for this year. That's how important a player he is, especially against receivers like Calvin Ridley of Alabama. So there's a lot of debate inside the analysis that could go on back and forth in this game. When the game is played at a neutral site field and not on somebody's home field, and you have points like this, and I can debate it back and forth, pro and con, side to side, I usually tend to go ahead and grab the underdog. And I wouldn't be surprised if Florida State sneaks in under the number here. The Jalen Hurts, DeAndre Francois quarterback matchup, very, very intriguing. And they gave me good cases for both sides here. And I would have to say, if you needed to play it, I would take the 7 points. But, I don't know that any result would surprise me there.
Well, Rob, before we jump into some games that will occur Sunday and Monday over the extended holiday weekend, I just want to remind all of our listeners that you can go to robvenosports.com, get the latest information towards line movements, weather, all that good stuff is available on robvenosports.com. You can also get picks from not only Rob, but myself and our third partner, Derek Davis. All of our selections are available. I know that all three of us had very strong college football seasons last year, and you definitely want to get to the website and check out the picks and get on board for a winning season with the crew here at RobVenoSports.com. Rob, before we jump into Sunday and Monday games, just real quick, give me I know you're not big on overly adjusting your power ratings, but give me your three biggest moves up and your three biggest moves down from last season to this season.
Well, I think, first of all, one that you would probably recognize as a move down would be Michigan. We talked about them early, and before I get too far into it, let me just explain to the listeners that where my power ratings are concerned, I actually put a ceiling on how many points I will adjust the team to start the season. I don't go overboard. I learned a hard lesson back in the very early 90s, Rob, where, you get your preseason annual and, these guys were horrible last year, but they're going to be great this year, and you upgrade, and the next thing you know, it was a wrong move because these teams don't necessarily, the good majority of them, don't change personalities over returning starters and guys that have graduated. For teams like Michigan that return very few, we talked about it early, 4 starters back on offense, 1 on defense, doesn't mean a heck of a lot. It doesn't mean Michigan's going to be horrible. So you can't downgrade them a bunch, but I did downgrade them to the maximum that I will allow, my ceiling, my floor. So Michigan would be one. I did, I give you a surprise here to many, but I downgraded P.J. Fleck in Minnesota. I just don't think that's going to go as smoothly as many people might think. I know P.J. Fleck is an outstanding coach, and the future of Minnesota is bright, but there's some things working against him as far as first year is concerned with that football team. So I would put them down there as the second team. And the third one, probably the Cal Golden Bears. I think that, California, with just a huge overhaul in philosophies, it can't help but sink a little bit in a conference that is very, very good, in a division that features Washington State, Washington, Oregon could be on the upswing here this season. So I believe that California has a lot to overcome, almost like a rebuilding season for Cal as they learn new offense, new defense, new head coach in Justin Wilcox. Like I say, totally different philosophy. So those would be the three that I think go down the most. I think those are the three that you would look at from a negative standpoint. Doesn't mean their season is going to be rotten, just I changed their numbers the most. Another one very quickly because of recent injury, Wisconsin has sunk about a point or so over the course of the last week because of the decimation to their linebacking core. Teams that moved up and up pretty significantly in the power ratings. 4 starters, North Carolina State. I think North Carolina State is a team that, and not just me, but a lot of people are looking at as being somewhat of a sweeper in that ACC Atlantic Division. You have the 3 heavyweights that you talked about earlier with Florida State, Clemson, and Louisville. But NC State played those teams tough last season. Remember, they almost beat Clemson. They gave Florida State a very tough time, and defensively, this is a very good ball club. So I think NC State, I happen to raise them the maximum that they could be raised for this season. I also gave a big raise to South Florida. We saw them come out and win a game on Saturday where they didn't even get off on a good foot, and then they scored.
No, they fell behind big early.
16-0 becomes 42-16 before you could blink. I think San Jose State thought they had something going on, but in reality they didn't. And then the third team that took a pretty good hike in the power ratings is Auburn. Auburn last year, a team that was predicated on defense, but boy, Gus Malzahn's offense could not get going whatsoever. It went that way for an entire season, so much so that Gus Malzahn gave up play calling duties during the season last year. He gave the duties over to Rhett Lashley, who's since moved on to Connecticut. But I think Auburn now, with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback, with the ability to balance out the offense, I gave them a pretty significant boost. So those 3 teams got the highs moves, and the 3 teams I mentioned prior got the biggest drops.
Good information as always, Rob. And as I said, you can get more great information like this, RobVenoSports.com. In addition to our selections, there's stuff there, great resources to help you maybe verify a play you're thinking about making on your own. And, of course, you can always buy our plays to see if we're thinking the same way you are, RobVenoSports.com. Rob, let's get back into it and finish up our Sunday and Monday games. We'll start with another matchup between two top 25 teams, well, at least on the fringes of the top 25, as West Virginia will play on Sunday evening against, lost it, internet connection. They are playing Virginia Tech in a game that Virginia Tech is favored by 4 points, and that's at a neutral site in Landover, Maryland.
Yeah, and for West Virginia, I think if you're going to tout what's good about West Virginia in this season, it will be the fact that they have a quarterback that I think is capable of running all aspects of the Dana Holgorsen offense this year. Will Grier, we remember him last playing at Florida. He had led Florida out of the gate to a really strong start, then, of course, wound up getting suspended and subsequently transferred over to West Virginia. I don't want to take anything away from Skyler Howard, the previous quarterback for West Virginia, but I think Will Grier is much more in the mold of what Dana Holgorsen wants as a quarterback, and I think their offense could get back to Dana Holgorsen-like numbers this year with Grier at quarterback. Defensively, you have to wonder. That was a defense, and I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here, Rob, because West Virginia, even though they don't return a lot of players to this starting unit, since Tony Gibson's been the defensive coordinator for this team, when you go through the numbers, he's put pretty good defenses on the field. I think better defenses than what you would expect. Question's going to come on the offensive side. Like I say, Will Grier's in, but Jake Spavital is your new offensive coordinator here. Jake Spavital, a guy that we know from A&M, was offensive coordinator there, and he comes most recently from Cal, and that's Sonny Dykes' offense. So expect Dana Holgorsen to really rev it up on the gas pedal this year with Spavital as his offensive coordinator. And the Tony Gibson-led defense, we'll see. I mean, like I say, I have to give him the benefit of the doubt, even though I don't know that the personnel is there to repeat last year's numbers, but he's always managed in 4 years to put a pretty good product on the field. He's going to go up against Virginia Tech, who many believe can contend for the West Division title in the ACC. I don't see why they can't. Obviously, there's a bunch of teams at the top there, and maybe with North Carolina sinking somewhat this year without Mitch Trubisky at quarterback, Virginia Tech can make their way up to the top. They're going to break in a new quarterback as well. Always sketchy in week one when you're going to go with a new quarterback. So we'll see how that goes for Virginia Tech. I think otherwise they're pretty sound. But I do think West Virginia probably has a little bit of an edge here. You may see a situation where the West Virginia offense is just in much more of a groove early on than the Virginia Tech one. This, like you say, it's played in Landover, Maryland, so it's a neutral site and a very good intersectional game, an important one for both squads. To haven't played the game yet, Rob, I think if I had to, I would look West Virginia's way. Just because it's in week one, I might have a different opinion if the game were played a month from now, 6 weeks from now. But right now, I think if I had to lean, I'd lean towards the West Virginia side.
Well, there's another good game on Sunday evening that kind of pits two teams from two different conferences against each other. Both teams need to get off to a strong start because they're going to face tough schedules within their conferences, and those teams are Texas A&M and UCLA. They played a great game last year against each other to open the season, and they're going to do it again this year. This time they are at UCLA. Break it down.
Well, obviously, it's not applicable in all situations Rob, but I do think that there's a little hint of revenge that you could factor into the handicap here. Remember, Texas A&M, and you and I talked about this quite a bit throughout the season during our podcast last year. A&M's ability to build fourth-quarter leads, 2 touchdowns or better, and then the inability to hang on to those. UCLA was one of those games where UCLA was dead and gone in that contest. I believe it was like 24-9, something like that, late in the fourth, and Josh Rosen comes up with 2 big touchdown passes in the last 4 minutes of the game to send that thing to overtime where UCLA subsequently lost. I do think that thought lingers in the minds of the Bruins, and now they have A&M on their home field. That could be a bit of an advantage for UCLA. Talent-wise, these 2 teams are very, very close. I think both head coaches are in the same type of situation where people are calling for their heads if they don't do well this year. Kevin Sumlin, I think he entered last year on somewhat of a hot seat. He's still there. And Jim Mora Jr. on a hot seat again. You look at it and you find out that there's a little bit of financial difficulty to buying these guys out. But, again, these are universities that want to win. So I think both of these coaches need – we talked about who needed a game more, Florida State or Alabama, earlier on. Both of these teams need this game for sure. I just happen to think that I would go with Josh Rosen in week 1. Rule of thumb that I try to stick by when I'm really, really indecisive about a game is which quarterback do you think has the edge going into the game? And I think Rosen is the better quarterback. I think UCLA has the better defense, and they have the home field and the revenge. For those reasons, I would take a slight lean towards the Bruins. But again, A&M is going to be fighting from the outset here because their head coach has probably relayed to them the sense of urgency throughout the spring and summer sessions that this team is up against right now in that SEC West. Great start. I think they got off to a heck of a start last year, right, where they 6-0 or 5-0, and then all of a sudden the bottom fell out. It's typical of a Kevin Sumlin team recently. We'll see if they get off to a quick start here, but if I had to play it, I think I'd be playing UCLA in that.
I have to say the most disappointing thing about these 2 really good games on Sunday is all day, no college football, and then both these games are being played at the same time. I mean, they could have worked that out a little better if you ask me. And they're not up against NFL either, since the NFL is going to conclude their preseason with all Thursday games. So they could have spread these 2 out. I know the NFL had 3 preseason games on Sunday, just preseason games last Sunday, and they managed to make a triple header out of 3 games. So I think you're right, Rob. They could have done a better job scheduling time-wise here. Let's jump ahead to Monday night. We'll talk about Tennessee and Georgia Tech. Tennessee entering the season with some high hopes of competing for an SEC title. They got a little bit of a tricky game right out of the gate against the Georgia Tech offense that is always a bit difficult to prepare for. How do you see Labor Day weekend finishing out Monday night?
Yeah, the one good thing about playing an option football team in week 1 is you get all summer to prepare for. I think the bad thing is then you have to take the field and you realize that you're not really prepared for it. Tennessee doesn't see much option football, if ever.
The SEC is the furthest place from option football there is.
And even when they branch out in those non-conference games, those FCS games against the Georgia Southerns of the world in the past and Appalachian State teams of the past, those types of teams where maybe you might find it, it doesn't happen but once every decade. So for Tennessee, you can't simulate it in practice, let's face it. You just don't have the knowledge of this type of offense to be able to do it. And they're going to get hit right away, even with Georgia Tech having a new quarterback here. Matt Jordan has received high praise from Paul Johnson all off season long. So while we always see it, Rob, as a new name, Georgia Tech graduates a very good quarterback, one of their better quarterbacks in recent memory, and Justin Thomas, and you see, new quarterback, wow, maybe they're not going to be as good this year. But Paul Johnson has really praised this kid Jordan as being a good thrower and runner as well. Combined with the backfield that they have, I don't think Mills is going to go here, which hurts a little bit. But, everything about Georgia Tech offensively is different, from the blocking schemes to the different options. And I don't know that Tennessee, which is a young football team, Tennessee, we talk about guys on the hot seat. Butch Jones is on as hot a seat as anybody. And while they're talented, I think they're young, extremely young, and to be faced with this right away, maybe by the time the second half comes around, you can adjust, and maybe we see Tennessee play better defensively in the second half. But if they don't adjust, I could see Georgia Tech scoring a lot of points here. Can Tennessee match them stride for stride without Joshua Dobbs as their quarterback? I think that's a bigger loss than Justin Thomas is. These option quarterbacks, it seems as if you can plug and play with option quarterbacks. You can lose one to graduation and put the next one right in there. We see Navy do it a lot of times. Army does it. Air Force does it. The difference in these quarterbacks, Rob, for the most part, is can the guys that can complete the pass that's wide open after the option fake. We've all seen it before. Air Force has guys running down the field with nobody around, Army, Navy, and Georgia Tech as well. The guys who can complete those passes are the spectacular quarterbacks for option teams. And if Jordan turns out to be that guy, this could be a tough game for Tennessee. I kind of like the Tech side in this one.
Well, Rob, that takes us through all of the games we had agreed to discuss. I'm going to throw one out, then I'm going to let you throw one out. A lot of games in week one. Let's each pick an under-the-radar game, and I'm going to go with, and it's a team you mentioned in your power rate rankings as one of your most improved, and that's North Carolina State playing South Carolina, playing at a neutral field in Charlotte, home of the Panthers, and you're looking at two teams that most certainly have expectations of a bowl game. I think a little bit more so for NC State than for South Carolina. But remember, South Carolina had really no expectations last year. They still found a way to get the 6 wins, still got to a bowl game. I don't think they want to regress and not make a bowl game. And I think there's a little bit of build-up around NC State this year, and they come out of the gate with a great test against a team from the SEC East. I just think it's a game to really watch and look at to see which of these two teams really looks like they want to start the 2017 season off on the right foot. It's a game that kind of is going to get buried. It's played at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. Right now, I'm looking at NC State as a 5-point favorite, total at about 53, which is up from where it opened. And I just think with the Michigan-Florida game at 3:30, that one could get lost. But I think that's going to be a good football game. You have any thoughts on that one? And then you can give us your under-the-radar game of the week.
Yeah, I think where South Carolina is concerned, obviously the return of Sky Moore at linebacker, and, just a tough injury for him last year. I believe, Rob, and I don't have it right in front of me now, but I do believe that this is Sky Moore's 6th season. He got medical red shirts a couple of times here, but the leading tackler for South Carolina when he's been on the field, having his leadership back on defense. With talking about Tennessee being young, I feel, in fact, I know I have this in my notes somewhere, that South Carolina is the youngest team in Southeastern Conference play. Will Muschamp had a young team last year. They remain young. He did a lot of weeding out last year in that process. They played a lot of freshmen down the stretch. They made some strides. But as far as upperclassmen are concerned, this team, I think, is somewhere in the vicinity of 75-80% underclassmen. So how they react in game one against a team that's a little bit the opposite, North Carolina State's more of an upper class style team here that's been around in the system for a while with a good starting quarterback. Obviously, Jake Bentley for South Carolina made a lot of people notice him last year. So it's a real good game. The line has moved toward NC State. I believe for those couple of reasons, the youth of South Carolina and the hype behind NC State this year. You know, in weeks 1 and 2, you find a lot of the bandwagon jumpers, the bandwagon type teams immediately soar point spread wise. And I think NC State's one of those. Everybody likes to claim that they found a team that's outside of the top 25 that they knew was going to be good. And NC State is one of those teams this year for people. So I think that's why we see the increase in line. But I do think, you know, once again, Ryan Finley, second year at quarterbacking the system for offensive coordinator Drinkwitz, who came from Boise, where Finley came from. Those two guys are attached at the hip. I think you can see big improvements for NC State this year. And in week 1, I would look their way. I think South Carolina is still a little bit away from being able to play these games and cover these numbers. But 6, you know, it's getting up there now. I still think you could be safe laying less than 6 with NC State. We'll see. I just have a real good feeling about the Wolfpack this year.
Well, Rob, I would tend to agree. I think that NC State is probably the team that I think has more expectation this year. I think they're the better football team as a whole. I think that they will get the win, and I agree with you. I think anything under a touchdown is probably a play in the NC State direction. What do you got? You have an under-the-radar game for us, something we haven't talked about that you think is going to be worth taking a look at amongst all the games on Saturday?
I do. I think there's a lot of intrigue to a game that's not being talked about a ton, but Wyoming is going to go to Iowa City and play the Iowa Hawkeyes in week 1, and obviously Josh Allen, the quarterback for Wyoming, getting an awful lot of recognition as far as mock draft for 2018 is concerned. A lot of people out on a limb rating Josh Allen the number 1 quarterback in this class that's coming out. That's a lot to say when you have Sam Darnold, when you have Josh Rosen, when you have the talents that are out there, Luke Falk at Washington State. There's a lot of good quarterbacks out there in college football, and next year's quarterback crop is going to be an especially good one. So to say that Allen is, you know, number 1 amongst all of them, and we know that draft situations are very fluid, and what we talk about here on August 29th will probably be so far from what we talk about on March 29th next spring. You know, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. But Allen has opened a lot of eyes, rightfully so, Rob. He played tremendous last year. Craig Bohl, the head coach, remember, he was the head coach at North Dakota State, won all those titles, turned over those reins, came to Wyoming. Took him 3 years to get his system implemented, to get his kind of players in there. But last year, they were outstanding, wind up in a bowl game, play Brigham Young right to the wire, 24-21. They actually beat San Diego State once last year, lose a close one in the Mountain West Championship game. So Wyoming's got expectations this year behind this quarterback. And I tell you, you're going to find out a lot about Allen right away because the Iowa defense this season is one of the Big Ten's best. I know we talk, you know, a lot about Ohio State, a lot about Michigan, but as far as top 3, top 4 defenses in that conference, maybe higher, Iowa's got one. And this is going to be tough sledding for the Wyoming offense. I'm interested to see if Josh Allen can pick Iowa apart a little bit here. If he does, you know, the Josh Allen hype is going to grow. That hype train is going to grow and start really rolling down the tracks. But I think Iowa's got a real good chance to cause him some trouble. And with new play caller Brian Ferentz in as the offensive coordinator this year, we won't see a lot of change in Iowa offensively because they just don't do that. But I think we will see, in hearing a couple interviews with him over the spring and summer, I think we'll see a little bit more of an attempt to throw the football. And now that they've added James Butler at running back from Nevada, James Butler transferred out of Nevada late summer, going to be able to play. He's eligible to play for Iowa. So you have Wadley and Butler in the same backfield. I'd argue that that's the best backfield tandem in the Big Ten right now. So if Iowa can force teams to pay attention to the run as hard as they probably will have to. Perhaps we can throw the football here a little bit with Nathan Stanley, who was just named quarterback at Iowa. Interesting game from a lot of perspectives for me. Iowa opened 13.5, bet down now to 11.5, so there's Wyoming money out there. The total has come down from 53.5 to 52.5. Both of these head coaches are cut from the same cloth. Both hard-nosed, like defense in the ground game. I think it'll be an interesting game, Rob. It's not getting a lot of attention. It's a 12 noon Eastern time start on Saturday afternoon. So if you get a chance, I would get a look at that. You'll get your first glimpse of Josh Allen against a defense that's far superior to any that he sees in Mountain West play. And you'll get to see that backfield tandem. James Butler, obviously Wyoming's familiar with him because he played at Nevada the last couple of years. But I'm interested to see that Iowa offense and see if Brian Ferentz is able to open up the reins a little bit.
So what's interesting about Iowa, I've been doing a lot of looking at win totals this year, and there's a little bit of a price on the over, but the over was only 6.5. And you look at an Iowa team that usually finds a way to win at least 8 games. I know they have a tough schedule within the Big Ten this year, but is there any reason to expect a little bit of a down year from them?
I wouldn't think so. I think that the defense, in my estimation, Rob, now again, we're talking before the season even starts, but in my estimation, the defense, I said it earlier, I think they're probably top 3 in that conference. So that being said, the addition of the to the running game and the new play calling out of Ferentz, I think, can get them there. If we just go through their schedule real fast here, they have Wyoming at home in week 1. They're an 11.5-point favorite. Odds makers are telling you even if they don't cover, they should win the game. They get one there. They go to Iowa State. They're a better team than Iowa State. It's a state rivalry game. Anything could happen, but let's give them 2. North Texas in week 3 would be 3. And then they get Penn State at home. The good news for them is that when they cross over into the Big Ten East this year, they play the 2 toughest teams at home. They get Penn State and Ohio State at home. If they could squeeze one of those out, I don't know that they can, but if they could, they'd really go.
Well, I have to remember they beat Michigan last year at home.
Always capable. In Iowa City and Kinnick Stadium, always capable. But inside their division itself, Rob, I don't know that any of those teams, Nebraska, Northwestern, Wisconsin, is decisively better than them at this point in time. So 6.5 to me does seem a little bit low. I think 7 and 5 is a good expectation if you're going to try and play that particular bet. And unless they get really bombarded with defensive injuries, I don't think that there's a reason to play it under. If I had to, I would play it over 6.5.
I actually made that one of my top over win total plays of the off season. Just you look at the numbers and you always do an initial glance, and I always take the 10 or 15 that really stand out and dive deeper into them. And when I dove deeper into that, I really have them at least 8 and 4. To be completely honest with you, I do think they take one of those games at home. I think more likely they're going to take the Penn State game than the Ohio State game, but they get 2 cracks at a top 10 program at home. And as you saw last year against Michigan, even when they're struggling a little bit, there's just something about them playing at home that leads to unexpected results sometimes.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. That's a team that's found home field magic for a lot of years under this head coach. And like I say, inside the division itself, you'd be hard-pressed. I know Wisconsin's probably better personnel-wise, but with the injuries at linebacker now, we still haven't seen Alex Hornibrook for a full season perform real well. So like I said earlier, I don't know that anybody's significantly better than Iowa inside that West Division.
Well, Rob, we've talked about a lot. I just want to remind the listeners, RobVenoSports.com, all your handicapping needs. You've got plays from Rob Veno, myself, Derek Davis, as well as injuries, weather, power rankings, and all that other good stuff that you need. It's a real easy site to navigate and a great resource for all of your handicapping information as we head into a very busy week 1 of the 2017 season. Rob, anything to add before we part ways this evening?
Yeah, real quick, where selection service stuff is concerned, Rob, I've been in this for a long, long time now, 24, 25 years, and my stuff has always been available through Sports Memo. The added benefit from the Rob Veno Sports site is that I also include first half plays, second half plays, and games from the FCS, which I follow pretty intently. So if you're looking for additional stuff, first half, second half, FCS matchups, which are now more commonly on the board than ever before. They don't come out till late in the week, but they're available on the board, and they're widely available at this point in time, maybe with lesser limits, but you can still get down on these games. Go ahead and find yourself a selection package at Rob Veno Sports. There's a bunch up there already of different packages that you can purchase. If you want to build one of your own, just call the toll-free number and speak with Derek. I'm sure that there's no problem in putting together something that you want to have for yourself. So once again, just visit the website for all your handicapping needs, robvenosports.com.
For Rob Veno, I am Rob O'Connor. We'll be back next week. We'll take a look at what we saw in week 1 and take an early look at week 2. Until then, for Rob Veno, I'm Rob O'Connor. We'll see you next week.